Okay, we're recording. This is the late night chat. It's July 20th, 2023. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Tonight we have a very special guest with us, Daniel Stone. But before we get started, there's something I always like to do. Those of you who have been with me before, I like to honor the presence of everybody here. So if you could just say the name that you like to be called during the meeting and your nickname as a child. We'll go with that. I'll go first. My name is Laurent, and all the kids in my neighborhood could not say that name. So they went with my nickname, which my grandmother, my father's mother, Afa gave me, and that was Boo. So they called me Boo. And when I go back to New York today, many people don't know my name is Laurent. They still call me Boo. All right, who goes next? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Terry, and when I was little, they called me Terrella.
Oh, I love it.
And my name is Diane, and the nickname that has stuck with me, but only certain people could say it without it irritating me, but it's Didi. And my brothers used to call me Dide.
Nice, nice. Okay, who's going next?
Marion in New York City. My parents always called me Marion, but my silly brother and sisters called me Mary Berry.
Oh, nice. Cool. All right, who's next? Go ahead, Ken.
My name is Al, and I'm called Al. I'm from Myrtle Beach, but right now I find myself in Maryland, where I came from.
What was your nickname? Al.
Al's good enough.
You didn't have a nickname as a kid?
I had many nicknames. I'd have to think about which one.
Okay.
I think my brother used to call me. Well, I tell you what. Little Ian's son calls me Alfalfio. So that's a
Oh.
combination of Al, Alfalfa, and Alfio. He made that up.
Nice.
But no one calls me that except him.
Okay.
But I thought it was
Okay.
kind of cute.
I like it. I see Dinku has a hand up. You're on mute, Dinku.
Sorry, my given name is Dilnavas, but ever since I was a kid, I've been called Dinku. And everyone knows me by that name, so I've stuck with that.
Okay. Who are we missing? Who didn't go yet? Oh, I see Gail has her hand up.
When I was a child, I had two nicknames. One was Red because I had strawberry blonde hair, but the one that I liked better was Henry. I was called Gail Henry, like a Mary Frances or something. Gail Henry. My father's favorite uncle was Henry, and I thought that was really sweet. That and so these days, that would be my siblings, brother and sister, still call me Henry.
Nice. I like it. I see Ken has his hand up.
Well, my birth certificate is Kenneth, but I go by Ken. And there's still a couple folks that either knew me as a kid or knew me through people that knew me as a kid who call me Kenny, but I never liked it.
Okay.
Now I don't mind, but Ken.
All right. I see Richard has a hand up. You're on mute.
Yeah, as a kid, everyone called me Dickie, and some people call me Dick, but Dickie was my name. And I didn't really, I got to a certain age where I wanted to change it. So I just changed it out of the blue to Rich when I was like
Okay.
18.
All right. I see Daniel has a hand up.
Yeah, so I was called Dan most of my life, and I changed it at around the age 50 back to Daniel. And because the meaning of Daniel it's from the Hebrew, it means God is my judge. And I very strongly relate to that meaning. So that's.
You did relate to that?
I do relate to it.
Yeah, great. I see Josh is here. Do you want to share your nickname as a child, Josh?
Hey, I didn't have nicknames when I was young, but as a uncle now, my nieces and nephews call me Momo.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
Yeah,
Love
which I
it.
think also means dumpling.
Oh, perfect. Who has not yet gone? Ralph? You're on mute, Ralph.
I've never had a nickname. There was a period of time, my middle name is William, though I don't think it was related to a time probably in late adolescence. I were wishing my name were Bill. I didn't care for Ralph. Bill that was more clear cut and short and just seemed to be distinct, easy to say and be a strong name.
Awesome.
I just stayed with Ralph. Stayed
Okay.
Ralph.
Thank you.
Stay Ralph.
Jay,
Hey, Laurent, Charles Haynes always said that he called Elizabeth Auntie Boo.
that's
So
correct. We share a
Yeah.
nickname. Yep.
good company.
This is cool.
Is there somebody who has not yet gone? Okay, so now we're gonna put the spotlight on my dear friend, Daniel Stone. I'm going to start us off with some questions, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A, and then a final statement by Daniel, and then a moment of silence with Baba. So Daniel, you're in the hot seat. I've known Daniel for, I don't know how long, it's gotta be 10, 15 years. I don't even know when we met. It's all a blur. But Daniel, can you tell us a little bit about your spiritual life? Because I know a little bit about this story, a little bit about your spiritual life before Baba came into the picture, just kind of a thumbnail sketch.
Sure. First of all, let me say hi to everybody, especially hi to folks who I know well, and nice to meet folks I don't know, have not met before. It's great to be with you guys. I've told this story quite a few times, and there's some pretty long YouTube versions of the whole story that if you want to hear the whole thing, you can get it on Michael LePage's channel or the Circle Center channel. But I was raised in a Jewish, intellectual, high-achieving family. My dad was an atomic physicist. My mom was a psychiatric social worker. You know, there was a lot of emphasis on sort of rational, rational intellectual life. And so there was actually no real religion in my life when I was a child growing up. We did sort of some of the ceremonial things associated with Judaism, but it was really pretty minimal about what we did. Maybe we did a Passover Seder or something like that. And then, it was kind of interesting. At the age of 12, one of my friends, Jewish friends, was taking Hebrew lessons, and I wanted to do something with my friends, so I asked my parents if I could take Hebrew lessons, and they said, "Sure, you can do it." They didn't have any particular interest in it, but they said, "Yeah, if you want to do that, you can do it." So he and I and maybe one other person would meet with this rabbi who would come in with these very serious, dressed in all black and, coat and tie and all that kind of stuff, and would teach us Hebrew. And the way he taught us was he had these books of Hebrew where what he was teaching us was how to take the shapes on the page that were Hebrew characters and how to say them, basically how to pronounce them in Hebrew. And that was the extent of the lessons. And it was, I learned how to do it, but, and at some point he said to my parents, he met with them. I don't know why he must have wanted to meet with them because they had no interest in this, and he said that I was so good at it, I should be a Hebrew scholar. And when I heard that, it had the exact opposite effect of me. Like all I was doing was turning shapes into sound. That's all I was being taught how to do. And if that was the essence of what it meant to be a Hebrew scholar, I couldn't see any meaning in that whatsoever. So if anything, it should have, completely turned me off to Judaism. And so, and there was really no religion in the house per se. But so that was sort of how I grew up that way. My mom was clearly a pretty strong atheist, had a lot of bitterness about organized religion, thought that it was the root of all evil, which I don't completely disagree with. And my dad was kind of more of an agnostic, leaning toward atheist. So that's my pre-spiritual life.
Okay. And then how did Baba come into the picture?
So I started in my mid-teens, like probably a bunch of folks on this call. I was in the hippie era of the 60s. And I also had been through some pretty difficult things in my personal life with my parents' divorce and the death of a very close friend of mine, and was going through difficult times. And my brother had been out at Haight-Ashbury in the summer of love time and came back. And he took me on an LSD trip. And it was an absolutely extraordinary experience. And it's really in keeping with what Baba said about, to a few sincere seekers, that LSD can actually open up channels of spiritual awareness that can be very helpful as long as you don't kind of keep taking it over time. And so I sort of put myself in that category. And so I did have this experience of higher consciousness, and that brought me to be very interested in exploring kind of what was that all about, because it really put me in a state for quite a period of time of really just open-heartedness. And so a couple of years later, I was living in the Boston area. I had gotten a conscientious objector status during the Vietnam War. So I was up there and I was doing alternative service, which is required for COs. And somebody turned me on to meditation, and I started doing transcendental meditation. And from there, I realized that, and I stopped doing drugs completely because they so clearly interfered with the meditation experience. And it really showed me that experience of higher consciousness is really achievable through these kind of more inward means. And so I started checking out different things like meditation and yoga and Zen, Buddhism, and things like that. And in that time, somebody in my food co-op I was living in Cambridge at the time, gave me a copy of the discourses, and I read them. And I'd been reading stuff, different kinds of things. So when I read the discourses, I realized, I said to myself, this man speaks with an authority very different from anything else I've read. And it was like he was like, comparatively, everybody else seemed to be feeling their way in the dark, whereas he really knew he was talking from a place of already being where I wanted to be, and was simply conveying that backwards.
Yeah.
But my issue with him was I couldn't figure out what his path was, what the method was. And I was very much looking for method. And so I couldn't quite figure out how to hook into him. So do you want me to go on, Laurent? Because I can.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. It's great.
Yeah.
And because we're going to shift in a little bit to the work that you've been doing for Baba. So this is very helpful. Yeah, a little bit more about, how you got from where you were to totally with Baba.
It's actually it's a much longer story and much more involved.
You could do a short, a few more minutes.
I'm going to really shorten it for you.
Yeah,
that I ended up being taken to the Mayor Center by a friend of mine who had become a Baba lover. And that was in 1972, where I met Kitty Davy. And Kitty Davy, for those of you who have not met her, was just the most extraordinary, one of the really most extraordinary people I've met. And but I didn't realize that at the time. I just thought she was a nice old lady, and we're sitting in her office, and my friend was there. We were having an interview with her, and she was very nice and chatting with her. And she asked me what I was doing with my life. And I said, well, I'm getting ready to go to Europe and travel around. And she looked at me very intently and she said, you know, I think you're looking for something. And I thought, well, I don't know, maybe, I don't know. I didn't know what to make of it. So the conversation went on. And then she said to me, she looked at me again and she said, you know, I think you're looking for something. And I think if you go to Rishikesh in India, you'll find what you're looking for. Well, that was a pretty extraordinary statement, which I didn't realize that at the time. And I didn't know what to make of it. I knew what Rishikesh was because I'd read, you know, I read about Rishikesh. So I knew that it was a very sacred site in northern India, that there were a lot of yogis and saints and ashrams. But I didn't know what to make of it. So I didn't immediately respond to it, but a couple of days later, when we were driving back, I had a very strong intuition that she was right about that. I should go to Rishikesh. And so I ended up taking, traveling, you know, I flew to Europe where I had a girlfriend and broke up with her, and then traveled overland to India through Turkey and Iran and Afghanistan, and found my way to India. The other thing I forgot to mention was in my searching when I was in Cambridge, the other person that I was very, very affected by was, I went to a talk by Ram Dass, at the time known as Baba Ram Dass. And he had just come back from India, where he'd been with his master, who he called Maharaji, who he gave absolutely no identifying information about Maharaji, who he was, even his real name. So but I was very, very drawn to Maharaji. So the two people I was really drawn to in my life were Maharaji and Herr Baba. But I didn't know how to find Maharaji. So anyway, before I went to Rishikesh, I was trekking I went for a trek up in Nepal. And while I was waiting, you know, taking a break on the side of the path, one day this hippie looking guy comes up and sits down with us, and we get to talking. It turns out he's been with Maharaji, that's who he's been spending his time with. And he told me exactly how to find him, which was just Baba kind of giving me that connection. And so I ended up going to Rishikesh. I spent some time there, didn't find anything, but it did prompt me to say, well, maybe I should really go find Maharaji, because he was actually very near Rishikesh. And so I then went to Maharaji, whose name is Neem Karoli Baba. And he gave me, well, I was with him for 4 or 5 weeks, having darshan every day, and, you know, just being with him. And he gave me an awakening experience, which is a whole thing in and of itself, but it was very, very profound, way deeper than LSD, let's put it that way. And then he inwardly guided me to go to Mehrabad. And so I followed that inner guidance, and I left him and I went down to Mehrabad. And while I was there, Baba in his own unique way gave me the exact same experience that I'd had with Neem Karoli Baba, the awakening. But when I had it with Baba imprinted on me that he was my master. And so that's how I ended up being with Baba. Now there's a lot of detail, but that's
such a beautiful story. I love that story. That's why I'm asking you to tell it again. It's fantastic. So now let's switch gears a little bit.
Yeah.
And I know that you've done lots of different work for Baba before the current project that you're working on. So let's get a little work back history here before we dive into the current work that you're doing. Can you share a little bit about some of the Baba projects and work, just so everybody gets an idea of like what you've been doing?
So going way back in 1970, so I returned from India and lived in Chapel Hill for a couple of years. And then I went back to Washington, DC, where to go back to school. And when I moved back there, Kitty wanted me to start a Baba group there, because there was a Sufi group there, but there was no Baba group. And so she wanted me to do that. So she, you know, with her help, I started a Baba group in Washington. And then along with my wife at the time, we led the Baba group for, I don't know, 20 years or something like that. So that was my earliest work. And we hosted a lot of the Mandali and put on programs and had regular meetings and all of that. So that was and there's a huge amount to be said about that, but I'm going to really go over that. I got, and then in 1998, 98, I think, the board at the center asked me, I'm a strategic organization consultant. That's what I do for a living. I do, leadership development, strategic planning, organization change, all kinds of stuff like that. And so the board was struggling with how they were going to lead the center in the wake of, there had been, Elizabeth and then Jane and then Charles and the whole, blow up about Charles and all that. And so the board was in quite a bit of disarray and at a loss as to how to govern the center. And so they asked me if I would come in and work with them on it. So I spent about a year and a half with them, putting together a governance structure for the center, which is still there. And it's been the basis actually of a number of other BABA groups. And it's been a very good structure. So I spent, and during that year, I would go down to the center and spend a month, every month I'd spend a 2-day weekend, like 9 to 5, both days, working with the board to develop this governance process. So I did that. That's another thing I did. And then I'm trying to remember what else. I then was asked by the center board to do a strategic plan for them, which I did that in 2008. And then somewhere around 2012 or 13, they asked me to lead the master planning effort to come up with a master plan for the center. So I did that for a couple of years, working and developed that.
And some work for the trust too, right, in India?
Yeah. So, and then I was asked to join the board at the center. So I've been on the board for 8 years. And then about 6 years ago or 7 years ago, the trust in India asked me to help them create a master plan for the trust, to look at kind of what should Meherzad, Mehrabad, and Meher Nazir become over, really to prepare itself for Baba's manifestation. So we spent about 5 years putting together a master plan, which is the master plan for the trust allows up to 1 million people to be at the samadhi at a time. That's the scope of that plan. So it's a very expansive plan.
Yeah.
And then they asked me then to be part of to help facilitate a committee of the trust to develop the spiritual training program that Bao had initially designed, that's in the trust deed. So I've been working with them for a couple of years on that. And I'm doing some other work for the trust, but it hasn't come out yet. And then Avatar's Abode contacted me and asked me to help them with their governance structure. So I spent a year helping them create a governance structure there for the Avatar's Abode. And I've done quite a few workshops for interventions for different Baba groups in LA, Northern California, Marana, Beats on One String. And then most recently, and this is the part that I'm most invested in now, is I've been very focused on the Heartland Center. I don't know how many of you have been to the Heartland Center.
Can
but
you
if you
just
haven't,
describe what it is, Daniel?
Yes, yeah. So the Heartland Center is a center in the center of the country in Prague, Oklahoma, which is where Baba had his 1952 accident. And there's a site of his accident, and then there's a hospital where Baba and Mara and Elizabeth and Meru spent 12 days recovering from the accident. It's a very, very serious accident. And Baba spent more time in that hospital room than almost anywhere else in the United States. And Baba said a lot of things about that accident. And I guess I would say to you, I think it's the second most sacred site in the Western world is Prague, Oklahoma. Because Baba talked about his universal work he did there that he said would benefit all of humanity. And it's also, in my view, directly connected to, Baba said before he came to Myrtle Beach in 1952, he told Elizabeth that he was going to be doing his Mananash work on behalf of the West in Myrtle Beach for the first 2 weeks he was there. And then he had the accident immediately after that. And so I really connect the accident to the Mononosh work on behalf of the West, and to what Bob has said would be America's role in leading the world spiritually. So there is a center, a retreat center there, a beautiful center there that anybody can go to and stay there and go to the accident site, go into Baba's hospital room. And so I've been working with the Heartland Center for the last year and a half to develop a project to acquire, to buy the hospital so we can create a memorial in perpetuity. And it looks like we are on the verge of being able to acquire it. The hospital is moving to a new location, and we're right there to buy it. And so we're going to be starting to do major fundraising for that. And we're doing the design for the memorial, and we're going to be doing a lot of communication about that starting very soon. And so I've been head of that project, and then by some circumstances, they asked me to take over as president of the Heartland Center board. So I've added that to my work. So that's a quick summary.
So I think, we need to kind of underline and highlight and bold your statement that you're trying to acquire the hospital where Baba recuperated under the care of Dr. Burleson. I mean, that's a pretty, what we call big, hairy, audacious goal, a BHAG, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And when we started working on this a year and a half ago, we had no definite indication that it was going to be, that the hospital could be acquired. But we believed that it was going to happen at some point. And so we put together a group of about 20 people from around the country to come together and work on this. And we've been working very steadily on it. And then just as that started to came into focus, we found out the hospital, in fact, is going to move. And so now we're in the position of really getting serious about this. I do believe it will be a site of major world pilgrimage. And again, one of the most sacred sites frankly, it's one of the most sacred sites in the world. If you really take on board what Baba said about this site, where Baba said, Baba said he would have to spill his blood in America. And Baba foretold this accident, as many of you know. But if you don't know, Baba really foretold it 20 years before by giving Elizabeth a little flower when Elizabeth first met Baba, and told her to note the date of the flower. And she wrote it down in her Bible. And then the accident happened. And the date in the Bible was exactly 20 years to the day before the accident happened. And Baba made it clear, and he said, this is no accident. This had to happen. And he said it was the greatest of his sufferings. And he called the accident his crucifixion. And Mara almost died in the accident. I mean, the doctor who took care of her, Dr. Ned Burleson, he said her skull was like, if you took an egg and you dropped it 3 feet onto a hard pavement, and it looked at the egg at that point, he said that's what Mara's skull looked like. And no one of his colleagues who looked at the x-rays could believe that Mara was still alive. And yet she survived, as we know, and was very good.
Well, and very lucid afterwards.
Very lucid. She lost her sense of smell. But and I just read today or yesterday that Baba said that she had to have this accident because she had to have a certain mark on her forehead. Baba had this mark on his forehead. And Baba said every time the avatar comes, there is that mark. And if you look at the photographs of Baba, or if you're ever in Baba's house in Myrtle Beach and you see that beautiful painting that Baba sat for, you can see that mark, which I think came from when he banged his head on the stone after he was given realization.
Don't forget, Upasni Maharaj's rock also drew blood.
That's right, same place. And Baba said every time the avatar comes, he comes with that mark. But Baba said he had to have that, Mara had to have that mark as well. So
I have a couple of deep dive questions on this one for you, Daniel.
Sure.
I think it's probably obvious, but let's just clarify. If the hospital should be purchased, the Mayor Baba group, the Heartland Center and all that, would not make a running, functioning hospital. It would turn it into something quite different. Could you share more about the vision of what it would become?
Yeah, I will. There are aspects of the vision we're still working on, but we have a three-part plan here. So the hospital where Baba was actually a clinic that was created by Dr. Ned Burleson, and that's where they were treated. And let me just say, the room where Baba was treated is still there. And anytime a Baba lover wants to go into that room, the hospital welcomes people to go into that room as long as it's not being used for patients or other purposes. So when we go to Prague, we just go over there day or night and knock, or ring a bell, and they let us in and they give us a key to the room, and you can go there. And it's been described by lots of people, the experience of being this, but people have been experiencing it as essentially like, it has its own quality to it, but it's an extraordinarily strong experience of Baba's presence, is what most people feel to. So our plan is in our first phase is to acquire but there's also a new addition to the hospital, newer. It's not new, but it's newer. It's a 2-story annex. And so our plan is to purchase the entire hospital, but to concentrate on the memorialization of the original clinic, which is to say none of it will be a hospital, that it will be a place where people can go have pilgrimage into the room that Baba was in, have pilgrimage into the room that Mara was in, and then we'll use other spaces for museums and things like that. That's phase 1. Phase 2, we're going to figure out what we're going to do with the rest of the hospital, because it's, the original clinic is 10,000 square feet. The other part of it's 20,000 square feet. We're not sure what we're going to do with it, quite frankly. There's a lot of ideas, and that's going to take some time to develop, but we're not focused on that immediately other than purchasing it. But it will just lay fallow. And then the third phase will be the acquisition of land adjacent to the accident site. The accident site is on public property. It's just on the side of a road. And so, but there is land on either side of it. And so our intention is to attempt to acquire and develop a retreat and pilgrimage site immediately adjacent to that. We think that that's a much longer range goal. So, yeah.
Awesome, super awesome. Before we move on to other topics, any questions from the group here for Daniel about specifically the Heartland Center project that he's working on?
Josh.
Hey, yeah, my internet connection's bad, so if I cut out, that's okay. How much is the rough price for the hospital, or are you also accepting donations? Obviously, I imagine you will, but I'm wondering.
Yes, yeah, we will be seeking donations. We're doing a lot of the prep work for that right now, and we're planning on starting to announce the fundraising. I think we'll do a soft announcement in August, and then a much more a full announcement in October is our plan. It's not clear how much the hospital is going to cost. I mean, it's somewhere between. We think we have no idea, but we actually think there's a possibility they might just give it to us, which I think is the most logical thing to be done, because the hospital building nobody's going to want the building. The land isn't that valuable, and if you were to try to do anything with the land, you'd have to demolish the hospital, which would cost more than the demolition. So, and also the hospital is owned by the city of Prague, and we have a very good relationship with the city of Prague, and we have a very good relationship with the hospital. They really like us. We're really good neighbors. We have 2 houses there that are people say they're the most beautiful houses in Prague because of the work that's been done on them. So we really are good neighbors, and people trust us, to take good care of it. So it is possible, and we think it's not at all unlikely they'll just give it to us. If they don't just give it to us, then the question is, I can't imagine it'll be that much. But what the money will be necessary for is for the repurposing and the renovation of the facility. That we're going to need real money for that. And that's just phase 1. Phase 2 is whatever we're going to do with the rest of the building. either demolish it or to repurpose it for something else. And then phase 3 will be the land of acquisition. So, and then there will be operational requirements. So we're thinking our initial is right now without, we're going to get more specific by the time we announce this, but we're in the $1 million range of what we're looking for. But but that's just the initial phase of
Sure.
this.
Sure. I see a hand up from A. Elizabeth.
Hey, you're muted. Elizabeth.
Hi, Dan. I
Hey.
just got here, so I missed your initial part. I had heard that a dispensary or a some type of dispensary was going to be part of this complex you're working on. Similar kind of a Western version of what they are doing in India. Is that true or not? Is there going to be some medical facilities for people who can't afford them otherwise?
So I mean, I can't say definitively because we haven't decided it, but it seems pretty unlikely to me.
Oh, okay.
That I just don't see that in the cards. I think for one thing, we certainly do not want to be in competition with the hospital. And they do have a very good hospital there, and I'm sure they've got services for people who are indigent and so on. So
Yeah, that's a good point, Daniel. So I think you missed it. The hospital's not closing, it's moving. And I think that's an important point, isn't it, Daniel?
yes, it is. The hospital is moving to a brand new facility that they're building just a couple miles away.
Perfect.
So there will be fully adequate medical facilities available in Prague.
So this is predominantly going to be a retreat center and like
Well,
a shrine.
Yeah, we already have a retreat center, in the Heartland Center operates 2 houses, and the houses are immediately adjacent to the hospital. They're beautiful houses, and people can go there, and you're all cordially invited to come on retreat there and have this experience of being there. But it is possible, but it's, again, we have not decided this. One possibility is that we take the existing hospital, we turn it into a retreat facility. I think the truth is that regardless of what we do with it short term, this is going to become, just think about what Baba said about his manifestation. He said everyone in the world would know who he was. America is going to lead the world spiritually. The spiritual regeneration is going to start in America, according to Baba. But just imagine what the demand side is going to be for a place like this. So eventually, whatever we do now is not what's going to be there eventually, I don't believe. I think eventually what's going to be there is going to be a major pilgrimage site and retreat, retreat centers and so on may grow up around it. But in the shorter term, having it available for pilgrimage accommodations and things like that, that's within the realm of possibility.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I see Rich has a hand up.
I don't know if it's appropriate, but I and another fellow named Paul Williams took a driving trip from Boulder, Denver, Colorado, to the center, and we went down south and we went to the hospital. This was in '94, and we didn't encounter anybody there. We just walked through a double door and wandered around and found this green, seafoam green, this room, and it had a plaque that said Meher Baba's room in there. And that was that, and we left. But that's kind of history for me. I've tried to follow the center and the house and the rebuilding, and I think it's magnificent. But I think the thing that I've been more aware of lately is what Laurent brought up and you brought up too, Daniel, but was the Mara's injury. And someone said, I think Jeff, I heard from Jeff that he said that Baba said Mara sustained half of his universal suffering. And that's just, whoa,
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
I hear people say that when Baba said it was the greatest of his suffering, he said he sent a message to Mara saying, and you bore half of it. I think that's what you're referring to. Yeah, there's a beautiful movie about this called The Greatest of My Suffering that the Heartland Center created and put out about 2 or 3 years ago. And if you go on the Heartland Center website and go in the section called News, there's a link to that film. It's about an hour-long film. It's an extraordinary film, and it has a lot of this in it. And if you're not familiar with all of this, or even if you are, it's really worth seeing. I mean, it's a very profound movie about the significance of that site. So
Awesome, super awesome.
yeah.
More questions about the Heartland work, or can I move on? I've got a few more questions for Daniel. Can you talk a little bit about your work called Journey in Consciousness? What was that about?
Yeah, sure. You know, I have a very good friend named, who I've gotten to know these last few years, named James O.D. I don't know if any of you have ever heard his name. He's a really extraordinary guy. He was the head of Amnesty International and the Seva Foundation, if you know what that is. That's a foundation started by Ram Dass that has been treating blind people in India and in Bangladesh and that area for many years, and curing a lot of blindness. And then he was the head of something called the Institute of Noetic Sciences. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's like a major kind of research on the paranormal phenomena out in California that was started by Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut. And we're in a group together called the Evolutionary Leaders Network, which is a bunch of people that are sort of, writers and thinkers and speakers and so on human evolution. And I never met him personally because he's got Parkinson's and he lives in Crestone, Colorado. But I found out that he's a Baba lover. So I made contact with him. So, and he doesn't know really any other Baba lovers. And so we've been meeting online every 3 weeks for a year and a half now. And I've been able to sort of acquaint him with a lot. He's studied God Speaks in the Discourses, but he's not, not beyond that. So it's been a wonderful friendship. And he's written some incredible books, one of which is called The Conscious Activist, which is just a great book. And another one called Cultivating Peace, which I think, just parenthetically, Baba said that the Mayer Center should will become his universal spiritual center. I don't know if you're aware of that. And Baba said there were 6 different functions of the Universal Spiritual Center, and one of them is called the Spiritual Academy. And the purpose of the Spiritual Academy is to prepare young men and women to go out in the world and basically cultivate peace by persuading people to love God and operating from a place of unity. And his book, Cultivating Peace, actually, I think would be a very, very good. Oh, and Baba said the basis for the academy is through intellectual understanding, just to kind of be a little provocative. But I think his book, Cultivating Peace, would be a great framework for doing that. Anyway, he lives in Crestone, Colorado, which is kind of a big spiritual area in a lot of spiritual groups constellated there. And he's been wanting to acquaint people with Baba, but he didn't feel prepared to do it. So he asked me if I would do it, and he asked me if I would do a program. And so I talked to him about it, and he said, the more we talked about it, I said, well, what do you think? He said, well, I think a video is how people really relate to things these days. So I put together a program that I call Journey in Consciousness, which is an overview of Baba's teaching and his life work. And it's 7-hour-long segments. It's all, and I did it online, all for free. There's hundreds of people have watched it. And it really is, it's really to try to synthesize, because, Baba can be very hard to approach. I mean, there are 1,800 books plus associated with Baba. Like, where do you start? And Baba's work himself isn't that necessarily that, easy to sort of, to approach. So this
And
was my.
don't forget, Daniel, that you were looking for Baba's method, and it's hard to find.
Yeah, it's very hard to find. Though I did find it, but it really took me. It really has been a process to find it for myself. I'm not saying for you guys, but for me. So anyway, so I put together that program and put it online and then left it there. There's a website called journeyInConsciousness.org, and you can go to it and you can watch the program. I went to Maribod last December, and there were actually a number of residents there who had been watching the program. One had watched it 3 times during the pandemic period. And so they asked me if I'd put it on at Maribod. So I gave the program at Maribod and the MPC. And then I just did it recently in a weekend format at the center. So that's the Journey of Consciousness program. That's
Awesome.
And I'm sort of on, I keep saying I'm going to turn it into a book. I don't do that kind of stuff. I mean, I love reading Bible books, so maybe I should do it. You know, I've not written books about, you know, organizational change and things like that, because I can't stand reading those kind of books. So I just haven't done it. But this actually is the kind of book I would read. So.
Okay, last question, then we'll open it up for open Q&A.
Yeah.
You're such a Renaissance man that you're also a musician, and you have 2 musical CDs. Can you talk about that music?
Yeah. You know, I was a rock and roll drummer in my misspent youth. And so, you know, I used to play in kind of clubs and with bands and stuff like that. And I pretty much put that away. I stopped playing drums, but I play guitar and things like that, but very, very sort of casually. You know, when I'd go to the Samadhi, I'd play some things like that. And a few years ago, as my consulting work, I started kind of phasing that out. And the music started really coming back to me. And I started really, you know, composing, and then I decided to start recording. So I recorded 1 CD that came out 3 or 4 years ago called Decorate with Song. And I've got a very new one coming out probably later this summer or the early fall called You. And it's been it's a little bit more I don't want to say it's more rock oriented than a lot of the Bobby CDs. It's not you know, soft, melodic, heartstring kind of music. It's got it has a lot of different styles to it. It's got some country, some rock, some Dylan-esque. It's got a bunch of different stuff to it. Anyway, but I was thinking that I think Carl Jung had suggested something like, or at least I remember him saying something like that in the latter part of our lives, which I sort of look myself as being in, because I'm sort of post raising families and post career, that a lot of the undeveloped or disowned parts of ourselves from our earlier lives start coming back into the fore. And so what's been amazing is like all this music has been kind of much of the centerpiece of my life and the creative life that I've had. And then also pickleball, which I started playing 2 years ago. I play almost every day. And I'd pretty much given up athletics and sports and things like that when I was in my teens. And now that's kind of come back into like a major part of my life. So it's just been interesting to sort of.
I love it. So those musical CDs will be at Share Your Books?
Yeah, Decorate with Song is at Share Your, or you can get it off Amazon. And You will be at Share Your, and will also be on Amazon, and will be on Spotify, and yeah. So yeah.
I see 2 hands up, but I want to say one thing first, and then we'll take the questions. I heard somebody said, along the lines of Carl Jung, that we spend the first half of our life putting stuff into the shadow, and the second half of our life pulling it back out again.
Yeah, I think that's really true. There's a lot of truth. There's been a lot of truth to that in my life, for sure. I spent 7 or 8 years very involved in Sufi healing work, and a lot of that was very deep work, working on shadow kinds of stuff. So, yeah.
Wasn't that the Ru work?
Some of it was Ru. It didn't start with Ru. Ru was sort of an offshoot of it. So it was not Sufism reoriented healing.
Right.
It came from a different lineage of Sufism.
Pennsylvania or something, right?
Actually, California.
California?
There was some in Pennsylvania, but the base was in California. I went to California
Okay.
for the healing work.
So I saw Ken's hand and then Terry and Diane.
Hey, Daniel.
Hey, Ken.
So a superficial question.
Yeah.
Pickleball. So have you been kayaking or jet skiing this summer?
I got rid of my jet ski. It's too much hassle.
Yeah.
And I have not been kayaking. I'm getting ready to go to Delaware. I've got another house in Delaware on the Delaware Bay
Right.
and on the Broadkill River. And so I think I'll be doing kayaking up there, but not very much.
Well, it's so good to see you, and thanks for all you've shared.
Great to see you, Ken.
Beautiful, beautiful. Terry and Diane?
So Daniel, what do you do in your free time, honey?
Am I free? Believe it or not, I actually have free time.
I can't believe it. I have your energy and the way you explain yourself. And this was such a gift. I can't even tell you. Thank you so, so much. Really, I just am blown away. I can't wait to listen to everything. I grew up in Massachusetts and knew Ram Dass, and I'm just excited to hear more of what you have to offer. And just thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Daniel, I listened to an interview, I think on Baba Zoom, that was a couple hours long. I have that right?
So it was that was a interview I did in April. It was on a program called Buddha at the Gas Pump. I don't know if any of you know that. It's a guy named Rick Archer. It's a pretty well-known, it's got 100,000 subscribers. And
I suggest people listen to it. It allowed Daniel to flesh out a lot of the stories that he just gave us headlines for. And really, really.
Do you have children?
I do. I have an adopted Indian daughter named Saroja. And she just had a baby, so I'm now a grandfather for the first time.
Oh, mazel tov.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And then I have my wife has two children who are very dear to me. Therese is just as beautiful. When she worked at the center for 3 years, and just beautiful inside and out. Struggling with some health issues, but and she's living with us these days. And then her son, who's a whitewater outdoor extreme kayaker, geologist, scientist, guy who's in Alaska now, kind of living his dream. And so, yeah, so we have the three of
Two
them.
personal questions to ask you.
Yeah.
Where do you live and who are you married to?
I'm sorry?
Where do you live and who are you married to?
I live in Myrtle Beach. I live down the street from the center. And I'm married to a woman, I doubt that you know her. Her name is Carol Russo. She's a psychotherapist and just a wonderful being, a wonderful presence.
He sure is.
Yeah.
I see Kenny's got his hand back up.
But I just want to say one more thing about Buddha at the Gas Pump. You can find that just by going to the website is called batgap.com, or you can Google Daniel Stone Buddha at the Gas Pump and you'll find it. It's about a 2-hour interview. So far, the video has been viewed by 17,000 people. And there's also a podcast. So I'm guessing at least another 5,000 or 10,000 heard it. So,
Awesome.
And it's all about Baba. It's really not about me. It was really, and he did a really amazing job. Rick Archer, he's got 700 interviews on his website. And, mine is very unusual because mostly he's talking to people about themselves. He's talking to me about Baba, and that was by design. And so he asked me before the interview, when we communicated, he said, well, what should I read? Now he's very grounded in spirituality. I mean, he was a very long-term TM person and a lot of other things. So and he's done 700 interviews with all kinds of interesting people, Deepak Chopra types. But so he asked me what he should do to prepare. And I said, well, really, you should read the discourses. You should read God Speaks. You should read this book called I sent him a copy of a book called The Silent Messenger, which is the updated version of Much Silence, if any of you know that book. I gave him my whole Journey in Consciousness program to watch, and he did all of it. And so the morning of the interview, he sent me a 4-page typed list of all the topics he wanted to cover. So he was really, really good, I have to say. You know,
Yeah, I only had 7 topics to cover.
right.
I see Kenny's got his hand up.
Oh, I just wanted to, well, love to Carol, of course, but to add that, yes, that interview is worth watching definitely. And I don't know if he mentioned, but I foolishly volunteered to check over the computer closed captions. So I spent about 10 hours going over your interview and typing it up and working it out. So there's closed caption on the YouTube video.
Wow. That's interesting because Merwan Dubash contacted me and he said the captions, he watched it right after the interview. He said it was like indecipherable. So thank you, Ken. I didn't know that you did that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's pretty accurate now.
Yeah, that's
You know,
great.
I knew the names and I knew the people, so I thought that a Baba lover should do it.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Marion, you got your hand up.
Yes. Would you repeat that location, how to find your interview again?
Yeah.
So it's real clear.
So there are 2 ways you can do it. If you want to go to the Buddha at the gas pump.
What is it? The Buddha at the gas pump?
Buddha at the gas pump.
Oh, okay.
And the URL is batgap.com. BATGAP.com.
Okay.
It's easy to find, and then just look me up, and there's.
Thank
he's
you. I
got-
want to watch that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. All right, any last questions for Daniel? Doesn't sound like it. Daniel, I said that you would have a final statement in my notes here. So is there, keep in mind, this is being recorded, so we don't know who will watch it in the future. Could be anybody. Would you like to say some last words before we have a moment of silence with beloved Baba?
You asked about, or it was mentioned about not finding a method. And really speaking, Baba gave us the path of love. That's what he said. And so the question always is, how do we cultivate that love? And, it begins with, Baba said, it begins with remembrance. And then it's just, how do we keep him in our hearts? The path is not ambiguous to me anymore. So and I'm seeing head nods, so I don't think it's ambiguous. Maybe I think it's clear to most of us that we've discovered that, and Baba brings us to that. So it's been a real joy to be with you all. And
Thank you.
Thank
you, Daniel. This was awesome. Can we just have a moment of silence with Mira Baba together? Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Awesome.
Mayor Baba Ki Jai.
Avatar.
Meher Baba.
Baba Ki Jai.
Thank you. Thank you.
Laurent.
Ron,
feel
thank
free
you. Thank you.
anytime. You were just wonderful.
Thank you,
Nice to meet you,
everybody, for
Dan.
coming and participating.
Thank you. Good night.
You
Jai
don't,
Baba.
you
Thank you,
don't,
Lauren.
you don't have to go home or leave. You can linger.
Yeah, Linga.
Hey, I have a question, Daniel. It's very difficult for me to articulate this.